I'd like to call the meeting to order. If you would stand for a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, welcome everyone who's watching at home tonight. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Trustee DeVore?
Present.
Trustee Gett?
Present.
Trustee Kazam?
Present.
Trustee Marfa?
Present.
Trustee Wigginton?
Present.
Trustee Weisenberg?
Present.
All right, again, welcome everyone. We have everyone on board in person. Next is approval of the meeting minutes from, Madam Clerk, do we need to defer this? Was there an error in the minutes?
There is an error on the agenda item, so we will not be passing those minutes. Those minutes have been passed.
Sarah had mentioned to me right before the meeting that she made an error a clerical error. So I would ask for a motion to defer approval of the minutes until the next meeting.
I move to make the motion to defer the approval of the minutes to the next meeting.
And a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion on that? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right. I do have a proclamation, so I'd invite members of the Steinlein and Hillier families to come forward, please. Anyone else come forward and take pictures? First of all, I want to extend my sympathy to everyone on your loss. You are in our thoughts and prayers. This is a great honor for me, having grown up with the Steinlein and Hilliers. You all were an inspiration to me to serve the Heights and to do my part. So thanks for all of your service. These are some extra copies that we made of the proclamation. I think there's about 8 or 10 extra ones there. And if you need more, we can get them. This is a proclamation in honor of Janine and Jeanette, the Weaver twins. Whereas Janine May Steinlein was fiercely devoted to the Peoria Heights she called home for all but 5 of her 84 years. Whereas Janine and sister Jeanette Hillier were born but 14 minutes apart in Tarrytown, New York, as the town's first ever twins, before going on to even greater heights as the Weaver twins of Peoria Heights and St. Thomas Grade School. Whereas the feisty identical twins were not unknown to push the envelope, one sometimes posing as the other, prompting the nuns at St. Thomas to tell their parents it was funny the first time, but they would not be as amused the second time. Whereas Janine and her husband John raised 3 energetic sons in Peoria Heights while somehow finding the energy themselves to work to feed them. Janine is a bookkeeper for 20 years at Hecht Stout Insurance, and Jeanette is a fixture at Peoria School District 150. Whereas the Steinlein and Hillier families were close, raising their children like brothers and sisters rather than cousins, Janine later graduating to become a beloved grandma and Aunt Neen from her Marietta Street home. Whereas Janine generously lent her husband, John, sister and best friend, Jeanette, and later son, Steve, to service on the Peoria Heights Board of Trustees, practically producing a quorum at family gatherings. Whereas Janine was engaged politically in her own right, particularly in the formation of Peoria Heights School District 325, whereas Janine and Jeanette enjoyed traveling together, trekking every November for the last 25 years to Florida, where they found the climate more to their liking than their French-Canadian roots might suggest. Whereas Janine left us too soon in late January of this year, leaving behind a reputation for kindness and generosity that will outlive her 84 years. Whereas Janine was a collector of unicorns and cookbooks, and most of all, an avid knitter. We, the Peoria Heights Village Board, hereby proclaim Janine and Jeanette, the original Weaver twins, as treasured citizens interwoven into the very fabric of the community of Peoria Heights, and sincerely thank them and their extended families for their contribution to making the Heights what it is today.
On behalf of my nephews and myself, I'd like to thank you all for this. It is an honor and a privilege. We've lived in Peoria Heights all our lives for practical purposes and have enjoyed every minute of it. As a former Heights very popular person used to say, Joe Hecht, he always said Peoria Heights is a great place to live and do business. And obviously we agree wholeheartedly. Again, thank you for this.
All right, we would be at comments from the audience. If anyone would like to address the board, please come forward to the podium, give your name and address, and try and keep your remarks under 5 minutes. Anyone? Welcome, sir.
I don't know if this is time to do this, but I will. My name is Chris Rice. I'm the general manager of the Country Club of Peoria, but I'm here on behalf of the Peoria Heights Chamber of Commerce. I serve as treasurer for the board of directors. The Peoria Heights Chamber of Commerce, on unanimous vote of our board of directors, would ask the village to allocate funds to the Peoria Heights Chamber of Commerce in the amount of $11,600 for the fiscal year 2022. This request would assist in offsetting fixed costs for 2 events in Peoria Heights in 2022. The first event is the Taste of the Heights, which is tentatively scheduled for Thursday, September 15th. The last time this event was held was in 2019 and has been canceled the past 2 years due to COVID. The Chamber is asking for $6,600 for this event to cover the cost of generators, porta potties, additional advertising, and lighting. The second event is the Kringle Market, which is scheduled for Friday, December 2nd and Saturday, December 3rd of this year. In 2021, this was an inaugural event that was met with great success. The Chamber sees this becoming a staple in the holiday event calendar that the Village and Chamber offer. The Chamber is asking for $5,000 to cover the cost of lights, generators, outdoor heaters, additional advertising, and another constructed hut at our Kringle Mart. The Chamber of Commerce 2022 operational budget has expense lines for both of these events. For the Taste, we have an expense line of $16,000 in our budget, and in our general advertisement and marketing, we have an earmarked $4,000 for the Kringle Market. Our request to the village is to provide additional support of these events, and hopefully in 2022, we will again start creating new normals and traditions for the residents and businesses in Peoria Heights. Okay.
Thank you for being there. Hold on just 1 minute.
Sure.
1 minute. In case you're in a hurry.
Nope.
Oh, you're not? So let's get into the budget. We'll do that, and then if you're able to stay around and answer.
I can.
That should not be long.
Perfect. All right.
Thank you. Any other comments from the audience? Comments going once? Twice? Comments are closed. Any old business come before the board? All right, let's get right into new business. This is really the only piece of business we have tonight. It's a discussion on the presentation of the 2022-2023 fiscal year operating budget. So Trustee DeVore, I'd ask you to start this, please.
So we've been working to get our budget lined out. Really, Dustin and Stephanie have done quite a bit of work with all the department heads. So I believe Stephanie's going to give us a little presentation on this, and then we will have an opportunity to ask questions if you have any still remaining about each department.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. I will pause after each department, so if you have any questions, you can ask before you forget, but let me just get that pulled up. Okay, so the fiscal year 2022-23 proposed budget begins on page 2. You'll see an overview of both the operating funds and the restricted funds. I am pleased to say that overall, all of the funds except for one are either balanced or are projected to have a surplus for next year. The one fund that does have a deficit is the INF fund, and we typically budget a deficit in that fund every year as an accounting measure. It's simply to allow the water department flexibility to use those funds for any emergencies that might come up for infrastructure repairs or anything that they might need. We do not anticipate actually spending that fund down to zero, and at no point would administration ever advise that we spend it down to zero. It's simply a accounting sort of practice to give us as much flexibility as possible in that fund. Moving on to the specifics of the general fund. You can see a breakdown by department of both the budget for the current fiscal year, the projections through the end of the year, and then the budget for next year. We had budgeted for this year. Thank you. We had budgeted for this year a small surplus, but fortunately the revenues and the expenses are coming in larger than anticipated, so we will have a larger surplus than expected this year. Good news, a surplus of about $113,000. Next year, we have a budgeted surplus of about $13,000, and to get into how we got that, we'll continue on. I do like to show this particular graph because I think that it's kind of good news to see. It shows the cash balance of the general fund over the last 10-ish years or so. You can see for quite a while, until about 2018, it was kind of meandering between a cash balance of $750,000 and about $1 million. Over the last, 4 years, it has grown substantially. You can see there is a large dip that occurs towards the end of last year, and that's where the board took the opportunity to make out one-time payments to the police pension fund. Also, the grant that we had received from DCEO last year is kind of mixed in there. That's making that dip look a little bit larger than it should, as well as some other things like economic development transfers, and there were 3 payrolls in that month. So that dip it's still a overall surplus, but it does look a little alarming, so I wanted to explain that. Are there any questions so far? Okay, moving on to the revenues. You can see that the village is still primarily being funded by taxes. I do have some good news in that the state and the home rule sales taxes, their percentage of the budget is actually going to shrink next fiscal year, not the amount we receive, but their percentage of the budget. And that's good news because that means we're diversifying where we get our revenues from. Actually, the thing that is increasing to kind of offset that shrink is we're getting more revenues from our intergovernmental agreements, which primarily we're anticipating more money from grant money is what that actually really means. I included these next 2 slides because I wanted to give the board kind of an appreciation for this particular year. We had budgeted very fiscally conservatively in terms of our revenues. With the pandemic, we weren't really sure how things were going to come out of the gate and where our revenues would be at, so we were really pretty conservative about them. I included this to show that this year has been an exceptional year. The sales taxes are coming in not only better than anticipated, they are coming in better than I have ever seen the entire time I've been employed here, which is over 11 years. So what this graph is intended to show is I took each fiscal year and took the amount of revenues we'd received in those categories through the point that we're at this point in time, so that everything would be level, so you could see where we're at this year versus previous years. We're doing very, very well. And these 3 graphs that I included are the ones that are the most striking, which are the state sales tax, the home rule sales tax, and then finally the income tax. All right. Getting into the other side of things, revenues are going great, but the expenditures are also important. That's how we offset. Breakdown of expenses. This is just kind of proportionally by department who is spending the total of the expenditures in the general fund. From last year, you can see that the police department is 45% of the next year's budget. That's actually down a little bit, and what's happening is administration's expenses are increasing as we're seeing more grants and doing more economic development, more PR through different intergovernmental agreements. The administration's budget is growing a little bit as a percentage of the budget. So to get into the details of that, this is a breakdown of how administration is spending its money. About 1/5 of it is spent on payroll, which is down as a percentage from the last year. What's really growing and is of note and excitement in the administration budget is that the administration-related costs, which are things like improvement of it's actually called Improvement Other, and basically what it is when we do any sort of improvement to the village that isn't easily quantifiable, that's typically where grant money runs through. So that's why that line item is growing so much. Another one that's kind of growing that's exciting is the professional services line item is growing, which is where marketing and economic development is coming from. And then on the following page, you can get a little more detail of what are kind of the highlights of the administration budget, both from this year and from next year. Things like a one-time contribution to the police pension fund, and also a offsetting program in the next fiscal year for police pension contributions that will mean, what that particular line item means is that going forward, the village will be able to dedicate its full levy towards reducing the unfunded liability as opposed to using current levy to kind of pay its employer contribution portion as well as reducing the unfunded liability. There's also money in the coming year to offset revenues for the HUD grant expenses. You can see additional funding is also allocated for the Greater Peoria Economic Development Council, the Peoria Area Convention and Visitors Bureau, funding for the Chamber of Commerce. And this fiscal year, there is something that kind of goes back to the budget discussion from last year. I know one of the comments from last year was that several trustees wanted to see a sidewalk program started, and we didn't have the funding for it. So I took note of that at the time. Chief took note of that, and one of the things that we kind of put in our back pocket was if there was a surplus, that we could make a transfer and set a capital improvement fund so that there would be money set aside for things like a sidewalk program, and we would have a set fund off to the side for larger capital projects that the board could use. There is a surplus, so following through on that, administration plans to make a transfer of $250,000 to establish a capital improvement fund. Are there any questions on the administration budget? No? All right, I'll move forward into fire. Breakdown of fire department's expenses. It increased very little, and then proportionally, it mostly increased similar to how it was already structured. So pretty much everything is increasing in about the same percentages of what it was already at. Their highlights include things like from this year, they were doing maintenance on the fire station, which we all remember. Both this year and next year, they will continue their annual testing and replacement program of the fire hose, as well as the programs to replace turnout gear, which is part of, I believe, a mandate that is required. Thank you, Fire Chief. Also, you'll see that the fire department received a grant and replaced some Thank you. I know it's not scuba, but that's what I want to say every time. They replaced some of their SCBA gear. And for next year, they're planning on purchasing and replacing 2 radios, as well as upgrading their reporting software and upgrading their email system. Any questions for the fire department? All right.
Can I make a comment about it, not a question?
Yes.
So when you look at the operating costs on the budget worksheet, I just want to say that it's like really awesome to see that you guys came in below budget and are doing everything that you can to get grants and do things like that. And I'm just really proud of like how far it's come and what you've done with it. So I think you should be proud of it too.
Thank you.
So thank you.
We have also applied for 3 grants for this year. Not sure if we're going to get them, but it's for radio replacement.
That'd be awesome.
All right, moving on to the police department. The police department in particular actually maintained its proportional spending as well. It is fairly, I think we've talked about this multiple times before, that the majority of the police expenditures come down to payroll and the costs of the officers themselves. That's where a lot of the services from that department are coming from. For their spending highlights, they keep things so bare bones that it is, like we talked about, particularly the salary for the additional officer. I realized after I kind of set this up, that doesn't include the cost of benefits. So actually even the majority of the increase that you're seeing in the police department is actually due to the additional payroll for that officer. They kept everything flat, flat, flat. Is there any questions for Chief Sutton about the police department? All right, moving on to the street expenses. This department is up slightly, and essentially, street expenses have been kind of reallocated a little bit. The cost for payroll for street is down proportionally, and instead what they're going to be spending more money on is things related to street work, which is like the street lighting, the actual streets themselves, curb and sidewalks. They're also spending a little bit more in things like, it's the equipment and vehicles, which we'll cover that actually on the next slide. Street's got several exciting projects for the next year, including some roof repairs and completion of a wash pad for maintaining and cleaning the vehicles at the Public Works Garage. They're also contemplating a program to start working on pocket parks to kind of beautify and clean up some of the small green easement areas that the village owns and make those a little bit more friendly for neighborhood parks. Also going to be contemplating setting up a small sidewalk maintenance program. This would be, instead of like a installation of sidewalks, it would be a maintenance of those that are already in place. Hiring people like we did in the downtown to even out the sidewalks and make sure that they're safe to walk and use, and so that people will be able to go out more and use those. The biggest purchase in the street department is going to be kind of split between the fiscal years. The street department has found itself in dire need of a new street sweeper. And so with the budget and the way that it is, the village is able to make a down payment on a street sweeper in this fiscal year, place an order for it, and then pay out the remainder of that street sweeper in the next fiscal year. Are there any questions about the street department budget? No?
I'm really happy to see there's a lot of attention being given to sidewalks and streets.
I do have a question about the sidewalk maintenance program. How do we identify those trouble areas? Would we communicate, crumbling sidewalks that we notice to Chief Sutton, or as we get complaints?
I don't know the answer. I'm sure Chief will have a better answer than I, but in my communication with Alicia Herman, they've identified already, like they have a list of sidewalks that they've identified as priority. And they can share that with us and we can have a discussion about it.
Yeah, I would be curious to see if those are primarily residential areas or business district areas. Because I know there's a lot of like areas below the hill that aren't necessarily in the business district, or I don't know if they're on that list or not, that are really bad, especially along 29 there.
I will say that 29 sidewalks are state sidewalks.
Are they state
They are
sidewalks?
not ours, yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
Okay.
I know we're using GIS to inventory utilities. Are we using that for sidewalks as well?
We're implementing, there's a thing coming through Tri-County that's going to help organize all that stuff. It's actually just getting started, yeah.
They will do it, or they will help us set up the...
There's going to be some training for a few of our employees, and we'll be able to integrate it into our current GIS for street signs and sidewalks and road maintenance and stuff like that.
And we hope to accomplish that this year?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And I believe Tri-County's providing that for a few years, as of right now. It's a service that they're going to provide.
Right.
Any additional questions? Thank you. Moving on to tower. This budget actually decreased a little bit. We found this year essentially what is decreasing is the cost of payroll. We found hours that worked really well for finding staffing and also keeping residents happy, keeping it open, keeping it pretty well-staffed. So that reduced the cost of the tower budget a little bit. So primarily the costs in there are asset management, which is basically building maintenance, and also payroll costs. Expenditures are going to be the installation of LED lights out in the park, which will be installed and paid for out of this fiscal year. And then primarily the big expense for next year will be our annual events, including summer movies, the Halloween event, and then an egg hunt.
Just a couple questions on this one.
Yeah.
On the tower, I know that there's been some talk about the Tower Park, the sign, the stone out there. This was before I was on the board, that the stone is cracked, and I think it's from when it was identified 2.5 years ago, that crack has progressed. So one of the things that worries me, and this is, I think, like a lawyer, but there were 3 groups last meeting that came and asked to use Tower Park for various events. And Chris, I didn't see you when I walked in. It's good to see you. But I know that Kringle Market will happen right here in Tower Park. I know a lot of our groups feature Tower Park, and I want it to be a safe place for our groups to participate in. And then one thing that kind of came to mind as I was thinking about 2022, 2023, is that 2023 is and I practice this at home, the quasquicentennial of Peoria Heights. So what that means is, and I had Alexa pronounce it for me, is it's the 125th year of Peoria Heights. And I think what the village and what this board needs to do is prepare for that. If you look at some of the stuff in the Peoria Heights Library, has an amazing display out on Peoria Heights history. And I would suggest that my daughter loves it over there, but they have a great display in the 75th tower, or the 75th anniversary of Peoria Heights. They did an amazing job. It looks like the event lasted a week in August. And I think Mayor Pitzel was the mayor at the time. And they had a history of various families, such as the one that we just had the proclamation on. Various histories of families and the Heights and how it progressed. A hotel up on the hill from the original days of Peoria Heights when it was Prospect Heights. So I think we need to be prepared for that, because I think it is a really good opportunity to highlight how Peoria Heights has changed, but the rich history that we have here. And that is just around the corner. 2023 will be here sooner than you know. So I think being prepared for that, maybe budgeting for that. I don't know if this is, then tower expenses would be the place, but preparing the Tower Park for such an event, because it is going to be the biggest event in the Heights in at least 25 years. So I think we need to be prepared for that. And if you, again, since I practice, it's the quasquicentennial.
So does that mean you're going to be the chair of that event? That's right.
Well,
Sounds like it.
I'm happy. What they did 50 years ago was they had a board, and I think what they did was they had it from various taxing bodies in various parts, such as the school, the library, the Heights. The Chamber of Commerce was involved. They put up a huge sign, and they also had the Richwoods Township. So I think if the various stakeholders really take an active role in this, we can have a really good event a little over a year from now.
All right, well, thank you for bringing that to our attention. Are you suggesting we need to increase the budget for that in this fiscal year?
Well, so it depends on when we want to have that event, Mr. Mayor, but the event was held, again, and I only use 50 years ago as the reference, but it was held in August of 1973. So
a year from this August.
it would be a year. Now, again, Rome wasn't built in a day, and I don't know if we need to have it in this budget or in the following budget. I think if this budget wanted to address some of the issues to make where we're going to be holding these events a safe place, and then we want to use the next year's budget to address some of the issues that, the fine issues where we'll need the specific expenditures. That would probably, but again, just something to keep on your radar, because like I said, it'll sneak up on us sooner than we know.
Do you happen to know what month we celebrated the centennial? Was that during homecoming week? Does anybody remember that?
I think it was around during football season.
It was like
yes.
I think it was
Yeah.
during
They
the
call
high
it
school
the beef.
homecoming.
Call it the Beef Fest, I believe.
Yeah, the 50 years ago, it was August 11th through the 18th. So I don't know if it's tied to a charter. It doesn't sound like it. I think it's just tied to whenever the weather or people want to have it. So
We need to keep in mind the chamber events too, if we're gonna plan a date for that, and if we're gonna ask them to help, we don't wanna overwhelm them if it's gonna interfere with the taste, unless that's the goal, right? Like we do the taste during it, so something else to think about.
absolutely.
I recommend we probably could budget for the event itself next year's budget, but we could start looking at some of the cosmetic things that you brought up, Trustee Wigington, now. And I do have a history on the sign you spoke of. We did get some quotes on replacing or fixing that, and that finding someone that was really even willing to come out and fix it, didn't have any takers. We did get some price on replacing the stone itself, and I remember the last quote I had was, I know it was over $50,000. 50. And that was just probably this year. So, but we could discuss that kind of stuff and kind of try to crack the cracks. I don't think it's a public safety issue as it is. At least what I was told, it's not an issue of crumbling or falling. It's just cosmetic. But I could not find anybody that would correct it. So we did get quotes for replacing it, and it was that much money. So, but we could, we do need to paint Tower Park. It needs a coat of paint in the gazebo. There's a lot of things we could do cosmetically to get ready for the event. But I think the budget itself, we could budget for next year. So
I won't even try to say whatever you called it, quasi, whatever it was.
Quasquicentennial.
I won't even try. I won't even try, but instead of replacing that sign with another rock, why not do something more that reflects the history of the Heights?
that was a conversation that the board had as far as leaving, keeping the look of the Heights and that rock. They liked it at the time, but I think that'd be a discussion for the board as we move forward, so.
Well, we'll put that on the agenda for further discussion, but just to make a point, Trustee Weisenberg, I think we would want to be respectful. A little quick history, when the park was redone, it was paid for, if not all, in large part by 3 families here, at a pretty big number even back then, or today. And that was part of the design, that rock, so I think we would want to solicit their input. But we'll put that on the agenda, this whole celebration, and get some more information. I'll pull my old books out and we'll put that on. Any other questions regarding?
I have a question about the tower expenses. Stephanie, is for payroll, does that include a groundskeeper or is that somewhere else?
Somewhere else.
Okay.
Let me check really quick.
It's somewhere else, yeah.
I know it's somewhere else, but I couldn't remember if I put some in here. There's a small part of it that's in here. I actually split the groundskeepers between Tower Park and Street because they spend a portion of their time up here in Tower Park, and then they spend a portion of their time down more in the downtown district. So I've split it partly between Street and Tower Park.
Okay, I just want to make sure it was in the budget for this coming year. Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Mayor, I don't know, I think we blew past, it was in administration when we talked about the Chamber of Commerce, and I don't know if.
We asked for questions, no one offered.
Okay, well, I'll talk a little bit about that. I do think we should, for the Chamber of Commerce, I think we should give them what they are asking for. I think currently what the proposed budget holds is $10,000. I think another $1,600 is appropriate. I know that I was at the Kringle Market along with Trustee Weisenberg and Trustee DeVore, and I was pleasantly surprised that the outcome was so excellent. And I think, and I only speak for myself on this, but I had my doubts when the board cut back funding that was requested, but I was very surprised and pleasantly surprised to see the outcome with what this board appropriated. So I think that with the expansion of this next year, or this year, with the additional hut that you have coming in, I would certainly be in favor of bringing that number up, $1,600, to address that. You guys do great work. It's a lot of good when we talk about how good the PR is in increasing the PR budget. I think there's no better PR than some of the, Taste of the Heights and the Kringle Market that the Chamber of Commerce, you, Chris, and everyone over there put on. So I would certainly be in favor of upping this $1,600.
All right, well, I'm going to assume when we go through each department, if no one asks questions or if no one expresses opposition, that we're in agreement of that budget. So if we want to go back and revisit that, we can do that once we get through the presentation. Go ahead.
Okay. The last section of the general fund budget is the waste disposal expenses. This is a contract that will end in December of 2023. It's currently 10% of the total expenditures for the general fund. The breakdown isn't quite listed in the contract, but based off of my calculations, it's primarily the waste disposal that is the majority of the costs in that contract. Moving on to the Waterworks Utility. This department had a surplus over and above its anticipated surplus, and next year it is also budgeting a surplus yet again. We have a similar chart to the one that I showed for the general fund, which, while not quite as drastic, is still good news. You can see the general climb that the Waterworks company has been working to increase its cash reserves for infrastructure projects. The Waterworks revenues are actually kept in exact proportion to last year, just an increase of, I believe it was about 8% that was over last year's revenues. Yes.
I just want to make a comment. I think this is great that we have a surplus and a healthy surplus at that, but we all know after listening to these infrastructure requirements that we have to deal with that this is a drop in the bucket for the work
Yes.
that needs to be done in the village of Peoria Heights. So
Yes.
that's just,
Yes.
it's not a negative comment on the fact that we have a surplus. It's just we have to be aware of what's coming.
Yes, no, definitely those cash reserves were increased and were growing specifically because we knew that we needed to start increasing funding to repair the infrastructure in the water company, and we do still have a long way to go. You are correct, Trustee Kazan. Moving on, the majority of the Waterworks revenues are coming from the residential sales, with 81% of total revenues coming from there and 13% coming from commercial. On the expenditure side, let's see, the cost of payroll has increased a little bit in proportion to last year's budget, but I can also say that the cost of debt service has gone down, and increased cost is being spent on things like equipment, vehicles, and infrastructure itself. The highlights for the Waterworks expenditures from this year and from next year include increased spending on the utility system for well maintenance. I'm not going to say which wells have maintenance because Superintendent Chandler has been coaching me on this for most of the week, and I keep getting the wells wrong, but he did inform me that we have done maintenance on we will complete maintenance on 2 different wells this fiscal year, with $75,000 budgeted for maintenance on the wells for next year. He's also looking to start improve the actual facilities themselves that the wells are housed in, and planning to replace the roof at well number 11 next year. He's also looking at the water system evaluation, which Trustee Kazan mentioned that the board just recently passed. And then he's looking to the future to purchase a valve exercise machine, which will make the exercising the valves go better for when they're doing water main replacements and water main break repairs. And also looking to update the communication system, the actual system that communicates from the wells up to the system to let the guys know how the wells themselves are doing. Any questions on the water budget?
What's the timeline on some of these purchases, Superintendent Chandler?
Well, like I'd say one of the major ones is the valve exercising machine. That, they just came up and did a demo for us last week, and that thing is pretty impressive. They actually worked 3 or 4 valves that we couldn't work, that are already working now, that weren't working correctly. That would be like in May.
Okay.
Basically, right at the beginning of the year, or at the beginning of the fiscal year. The well communication systems, that's going to be throughout the year. I think I have to wait for the guy from Honeywell and see where we're looking at roughly of, that's basically going from landlines to cell-based communications, because if we lose a phone line, we lose communication with our wells and our low level, and we don't know how much water we have in our towers and stuff like that, so.
Okay. And that assessment that we're getting done, they expect to be done in August?
Yeah, approximate, yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Next, I'll go through real fast a overview of the restricted funds. So these are all funds that have restrictions on how they can be spent. Just real quick, here's an overview of each one. Going into more detail, the motor fuel tax fund, the board passed recently within the last month the expenditures for the next fiscal year. Primarily, it'll be spent on seal coating, with the next largest expenditure being on spray patching. This is kind of a normal size program. We had done a very large program last year, used some of our cash reserves in order to complete a larger program, kind of get a little bit caught back up on some things that had taken a step back. And so the village is going back to a more normal spray patching and seal coating program for the following year. We are building up, you can see that the ending cash reserves are over $500,000. The state has been issuing funds from the proceeds of a bond sale to municipalities in order for them to complete a larger infrastructure project. The village has had to save up our payments in order to find an appropriate project for these funds, and is looking to complete work on Forest Park Drive, not summer of 2022, but probably the summer of 2023. So those cash reserves are being built up because of that funding from the state. Any questions on the MFT? The Business Development District funds. The spending in this particular department has changed with a focus. The focus used to be primarily on matching grants for businesses. In the coming fiscal years, we'll be retaining the matching grants for businesses, but the spending on that will decrease slightly. It's decreasing in order to provide additional funding for community development. These are things like grant funding, the support services for grants. Also, I do believe as the BDD fund has grown, so as the BDD fund has grown, the transfer to development agreements, the portion of the BDD funds that are allocated to pay for development agreements has grown, so that's also increasing that budget. This particular slide and the one that follows, both the TIF and the SSA, they're not part of the budget. They're not included in the budget documents because they're their budget was actually set up and baked into the creation of them. But I do like to keep the board updated on how they're going and kind of what's coming for them for the coming year. So I included these, just kind of a quick rough projection for what the TIF and the SSA will do. For the TIF, you can see that the majority of it is actually returned back to developers for the development agreements, but there's also reimbursements to the school. About 22% of the revenue or the expenses will be returned to the school. And then from there, they're also starting to do engineering, legal services, professional servants, and improvements of the village. So we'll be seeing some projects come out of there. For the SSA, it's kind of a similar situation where a lot of those funds are transferred back to the developers or used to make the bond payment, but it's also helping to do some professional and economic development out of this fund. And then finally, this is the fund that I mentioned at the beginning, the one that is operating in a deficit. It's simply just because that particular fund was created in order to do infrastructure maintenance in the village on the water system. And every year, we allocate any funds that are in excess of the loan payments that it is obligated to, both its cash reserves and any excess in the revenues that year. We basically budget them out as an expenditure in case the water department has an emergency that it needs to use those funds. Are there any questions on the restricted funds?
And if not, is there any area that we covered tonight that you'd like to go back and revisit and propose an increase or a decrease?
I have a question to trustee Wigginton's with the chamber. Can you answer, did you have the financial review done that we requested?
We've actually engaged, we're starting, yes, engaged with James Linehan. He's engaged with us to 2021 review.
Okay. I am in favor of these events. I'm in favor of raising it to the 11.5 that they're asking for. Like, I agree with that. We've said several times though that we would not approve money in this fiscal year budget unless it was finished. And like, I understand that they didn't have the stuff to do the audit, but we said that we would do a review. And I feel like every other department head is being held to that same standard. So I'm in favor of increasing it. I'm in favor of doing it, but they have to have the review done before we move forward. We told them that in December. We told them that the year previous. Like, I feel like if we don't hold true to that, then we're kind of just being pushed over. But I'm with you. I think your events are great. I think you guys do a great job, but they have to do the review.
I agree with that, Trustee DeVore. One of the things we could do is you could put it in the budget, but we don't write any checks until the audit is
I would be in
completed.
favor of that.
Yeah, I agree with that. What is the timeline, do you think?
We're in the middle of tax season, so
Sure.
I'm kind of waiting on there, how fast they can turn it
Yeah,
over.
because I do agree with trustee Wigginton. These are two amazing events. It's a tremendous amount of work, and it's great publicity for the village of Peoria Heights, and we don't want to tie the hands of the chamber, prevent these events from happening, but I agree that we need to have the documents that we've been requesting for some time.
And I cannot overemphasize the seriousness of that, and some people may not get it, but the issue is that we are providing you with public money. And we all read in the media often of people with gambling problems or addictions who sometimes dip into funds that are not theirs and misuse those, and we have to be able to assure our residents and our citizens that we're accounting for everything. So we're not suggesting at all any wrongdoing. We know the Chamber's a great organization, but one person within that organization can sometimes make a really bad mistake. And the only way we would know that is if you're having an audit. And so that really is the big key factor here. So I hope the Chamber Board understands that, and that's.
And I guess my question is, will the 2021 review be sufficient to this group? Just so we're not looking back for 2 or 3 years? Or are we?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what we said, that's what we agreed upon,
I
right?
just want to
Yeah,
make sure that.
2021.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, no.
And then moving forward, the audits will have to be done yearly, right?
Well,
Or-
reviews. Not a full audit, reviews.
Okay, so then your reviews would have to be done yearly in order to continue to receive funding, yeah.
So just a few comments, kind of underscoring what trustee Wigginton said. I did attend the Kringle Mart, and it was nothing short than magical. I loved the event. I mean, it just the feel in the air. I mean, I had never went to see anything like it. But just in case there was some confusion at home, I was glad to join this board in fully funding the Kringle Mart. What wasn't funded was marketing expenses. Like thousands of dollars to market Small Business Saturday. I will continue to support funding the Kringle Mart, but I don't think it's the responsibility of the citizens of Peoria Heights to fund marketing for special interest groups whose main objective is to further the interests of businesses. I think that's great. I think that's I love the chamber. I think it's great that it's here. It's just, that's their responsibility. That's their thing. But I too agree with increasing the funding to support the Kringle Mart. I supported it the first time. But I just want the people at home to know that these events were fully funded, minus the marketing expenses. But by the turnout, I think we nailed that one. So.
I hope it's just as magical next
No,
year.
I agree. I'll be there. But no, I look forward to the Kringle Mart this year, and I look forward to supporting it.
One thing that I totally agree with what everyone has said, and I want to agree with Trustee Weisenberg. It really was magical. But I want to say that, I think requiring an audit and a review of the chamber is certainly reasonable. But I also hope that we don't narrowly sculpt out the chamber for requiring them an annual review since they're receiving public money. If we're going to require a review of every organization that requests funds of this body, great. We should require that of everyone. So everyone that comes in here who wants BDD funds, they should open up the books. They should open up the books for TIF funds. They should open up the books for asking for a donation. If that's what we're going to require, let's not narrowly sculpt out the chamber. Let's make sure we're painting with a broad brush when we're asking and putting these requirements on one particular organization. So I hope that this board will be open to requiring the openness of every organization that comes in here and asks for a donation.
I'll second that. I agree completely.
That's the policy.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
We're not changing anything. That's the policy right now and will be.
That actually is leading me into a comment I wanted to make about the TIF funds. This is an umbrella statement, and the BDD funds. In the next year, and I think the consulting services of Wayne Aldrich have been completely invaluable in the short time he's been with us. So this board will be entering into discussions about how we're going to handle TIF and BDD distribution going forward.
I appreciate that. And the one thing that just comes to mind is when we had a discussion previously from the Discover Peoria group, we weren't able to identify at the time that we were funding that what type of organization it was. So we didn't know, and that's in the minutes, we didn't know if it was a charitable organization, was it a 501c3? We didn't know, yet we still funded it. So I think that we have to be careful when we are asking for these reviews. We didn't know what kind of organization it was. So, that's
So
just
are
one
you
example.
suggesting that we don't ask the chamber for any review at all? We just give them
I'm not
every year? I'm asking what your suggestion is, because clearly you're against it. So what is your
That we need to be
suggestion moving forward?
consistent.
My suggestion, and I'll repeat what I said, Trustee DeVore, was that we paint with a broad brush and we require every organization to open up the books if we're going to sculpt out one. So my thing, and which apparently is policy, is that we ask every organization to follow the same regulations that we're putting down on the chamber.
Sorry to jump in there. I pointed this out last time. There's a difference between an organization walking in here and asking for charity and purchasing the services of Discover Peoria. We didn't make a donation to Discover Peoria. We purchased a service. There's a night and day difference between charity and purchasing someone's services. I don't think we request audits for every company we purchase a service from. I pointed this out last time, it's night and day. I agree, every cent of public money that is given out via charity or a donation, we should know where it's being spent. If a company, if we solicit the services and purchase the services of a company, I think that's a completely different scenario altogether.
Well, we make contributions to the Greater Peoria EDC. They're a public organization partly, and they're audited, and we make a contribution to the Convention and Visitors Bureau. Their funds are audited. So that's the policy, and if we miss something, please point it out. But that's the way things are going to stand, that we're going to expect accountability for public dollars. Anyone else? I'm assuming then that you all are in agreement in increasing the funding to the chamber.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
All right. We're going to move on to any miscellaneous business. Any miscellaneous business come before the board? Hearing none, we'd be at payment of the bills. I'd ask for a motion to pay the bills.
So moved.
I have a motion.
Second?
Okay. Any discussion on the motion or any question on any of the bills?
One question, and I spoke with Chief Sutton about this earlier. We had the expense of a demolition of a property, just publicly, because I know I had gotten a few emails about the concerns regarding the expense the village incurs taking down properties. We will recoup our costs
Correct.
with that demolition.
Yeah,
Do you know roughly how long? I forget.
No, but it's the same process that we used when we demoed the other properties that we own. We did
Okay.
recoup that once we sold them. So yeah, that will be built into that cost.
Okay.
Yep.
Anyone else? All right, Madam Clerk, call the roll.
Trustee DeVore?
Aye.
Trustee Gett? Trustee Kazam?
Aye.
Trustee Morfell?
Aye.
Trustee Wigginton?
Aye.
Trustee Weisenberg?
Aye.
All right, the bills are paid. Trustee Gett,
Make a motion to adjourn.
is there a second?
Second.
Second.
All those,
Sorry.
all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you, Stephanie, great job.
Thank you, Mayor, I appreciate that.
Really great. And I was like, oh.